There are fires that burn wood, fires that consume flesh, and then there are fires that defy the laws of all things living and dead, fires that do not begin, but awaken. On a cold morning in November 1972, a security guard named Elias Kruger reported a strange, oily smoke curling from under the steel doors of Storage Room 6 in the back halls of the Berlin Museum of Antiquities. No alarms had sounded, no fire detectors had been triggered, and yet as he pushed the door open with trembling fingers, the air inside struck him like a fever, thick with the scent of burning resin, scorched linen, and something else, something that smelled like history being erased. What lay before him was not a fire, it was what remained after a fire that should not have happened. Inside the sealed, climate-controlled vault meant for fragile remains, one of the most well-preserved mummies ever recovered from the Valley of the Queens had turned to blackened ash. From the inside out, the linen wrappings still held its shape like a ghostly cocoon, but within the body had hollowed, charred, imploded. No light, no heat source, no oxygen, and no explanation. The specimen, catalogued as MQ442, had been excavated in 1938 from an undisclosed shaft near Luxor by a controversial Austrian archaeologist, Professor Otto Lenz. The official record stated that it belonged to an unnamed priestess of the 19th dynasty. But in the private correspondences between Otto and his mistress, uncovered decades later, he referred to her only as the Quiet Flame. From the moment of its unearthing, MQ442 had been shrouded in whispers. Porters who helped haul her sarcophagus to the surface spoke of sudden nosebleeds, hallucinations of drowning in sand, and dreams of a woman humming beneath the earth. Within a week, 3 workers had vanished, their tents found flattened, their tools rusted overnight as if 100 years had passed. Lenz dismissed these tales as desert hysteria. But in his personal notes, the ones he never meant for any museum, he recorded something else. He wrote, "She is not dead. She is waiting." Lenz returned to Vienna with his prize, but never made it to the lecture circuit. A month after the shipment arrived, he was found hanging in his library, his entire face scorched black. Though the rest of his body remained untouched, the police called it a suicide. The museum called it tragic, but the few students who had studied under him remembered his final seminar, where he muttered over and over in broken Arabic, "Do not wake the ones who burn." The mummy was quietly stored, passed between collections like a cursed heirloom. Some curators refused to even speak of it. Others attempted to carbon date her remains, but found the samples resistant to any analysis, as if the very core of her being rejected the touch of modern science. And then came the fire. The incident in 1972 should have been the end of her tale. A freak combustion, an accident buried in paperwork and bureaucratic language. But what the museum never released, what Elias Kruger would only confess years later on his deathbed, is that he saw something move inside that cocoon of ash before it collapsed. Not smoke, not flame, something pulsing, did something alive. In the official report, the word spontaneous combustion was scribbled hastily and underlined twice, as though repetition might force the world to believe it. But spontaneous combustion implies randomness, chaos. This was not chaos, it was precise. Ritualistic, death reenacted. Behind closed doors, a special committee was formed. Not to investigate the cause, but to decide what should be done with the remains. The linen shell was removed, sealed in triple glass containment, and stored once again, this time in a facility beneath the Alps, known only to a handful of European institutions. They named it the Ember Vault. But not everything stays buried. 38 years later, in 2010, a student from Prague named Marek Dvorak published an obscure thesis on thermal anomalies in ancient embalming techniques. This means the ashes were heating rhythmically, as if breathing. No one outside a very small circle took it seriously. Marek vanished 2 months after publishing, last seen boarding a train to Munich. His laptop was found days later, burned to the motherboard. There were no fingerprints, no traces of fuel. Only the faint scent of frankincense and charred copper. And then the fires began again. Not in museums, not in laboratories, but in places with no obvious connection. A crypt in Italy, an abandoned church in France, a salt mine in Poland. Each fire left behind no accelerants, no clues. Only one thing linked them. In every location, there had once been briefly, quietly, an artifact catalogued by Professor Otto Lenz, and all of them had vanished. To this day, no one can explain what happened in Berlin that morning in 1972, but those who still speak of MQ442, in hushed tones, say this: the fire was not destruction. It was birth. Something old had stirred. Something that hated the cold silence of tombs. Something that remembers the light and wants it back. In the winter of 2011, a coded envelope arrived at the Institute of Occult Anthropology, and it bore no return address, no postage stamp, only a wax seal pressed with the crude insignia of a phoenix wrapped in linen. Inside, a single sentence typed in faded ink: I have seen the second flame. There was no signature, no context. Only a set of GPS coordinates pointing to an uninhabited region near Lake Nimi in Italy. Once the sacred site of the Temple of Diana that spring, covert expedition was organized. They found nothing at the surface. But local shepherds whispered of strange lights underground, of warmth rising from the stone at night, of animals refusing to graze within a certain radius. They called it La Terra che Respira. It's the land that breathes. 12 meters beneath a forgotten crypt, they unearthed a chamber that had not been touched in over a millennium. Carved into the wall, in Latin scorched black into the limestone, were the words, Lucium Retha, et Artibus. Return the light, and you will burn. At the center of the chamber was a hollow, rectangular, the exact dimensions of a human body, but there was no coffin. Only a single linen wrap, folded perfectly, resting upon obsidian shards that hissed with residual heat. No remains, no ash, just that same scent again. Resin, smoke, and something unplaceable, like scorched memory. The object was taken, catalogued as artifact hashtag LND-17, cool, and brought against protocol to a private facility in Zurich. There. Over the course of 6 nights, all 6 surveillance cameras trained on the linen malfunctioned one after the other. One researcher, a woman named Dr. Eloise Varney, began recording her notes by hand, claiming that the sensors cannot see what does not wish to be seen. Her journal described temperature fluctuations, whispers in the walls, and on the 6th night, the linen folding itself into the shape of a human chest, as if remembering the body that once lay within it. On the 7th night, Dr. Varney disappeared. Her lab coat was found neatly folded on the floor beside the linen. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just heat marks scorched into the marble tiles, in the shape of 2 bare feet. Something worse. The smell of burning hair. She was never found. It was around this time that MQ442 re-emerged from silence. The triple-sealed glass chamber in the Ember Vault, untouched for nearly 4 decades, began to fog from within. Not from condensation, but from heat. Inside, the wrappings began to collapse inward, pulsing like lungs. Technicians were forbidden from approaching. But a janitor named Carl Weiss, unaware of the new restrictions, approached the vault to clean the glass. By the time they found him, Carl was kneeling, eyes wide, face frozen in awe and agony. He had clawed deep red lines into his own neck, not out of pain but reverence. On the security recording, his lips moved slowly. One word, again and again. She remembers. The vault was locked. Funding was cut. Files were erased. The last known record of MQ442 was archived under the codename Project Ember. Blacklisted from International A, but not all knowledge stays buried. In 2014, a small team of digital archaeologists working out of Cairo decrypted fragments of Lenz's original expedition footage, thought destroyed in World War II. Among the recovered reels was a silent, flickering video of the moment they unsealed the sarcophagus. The footage is brief, only 17 seconds. But in those 17 seconds, as the camera pans across the priestess's face, a single tear appears to form and trail down her mummified cheek. A trick of the light. Moisture long trapped, suddenly freed, science says yes. But one of the researchers on the decryption team, a devout atheist, left a single sentence in his final report before quitting the field entirely. It is not the dead we fear, it is the ones who wait. By now, the pattern was undeniable. Wherever an item connected to MQ442 was disturbed, Fire followed. Silent, targeted fire, precise and intimate. Not a cleansing, but a calling. The theory among those few who dared to speak was that the priestess was not merely preserved, but bound. Embalming, in her case, had not been an act of reverence, but imprisonment, a sealing away of something older than memory. Something that could not die, only be buried in linen and ritual, kept cold by a silence humanity no longer respects. The linen was never meant to preserve, it was meant to contain. And when those bindings, physical or symbolic, were broken, the heat returned. Not as a consequence, but as a homecoming. Because what had been forgotten for millennia was this. The quiet flame was not a name, was a prophecy. Her name was Sofia Markovic, a conservator of ancient textiles, with hands trained to distinguish between centuries by the softness of a thread. She had never believed in curses, only patterns. And when patterns emerged, heat anomalies, linen warping against logic. Whispers of MQ442 she saw not fear, but an invitation. It was Sophia who was chosen in 2016 to lead a covert evaluation of Project Ember's remaining artifacts. By then, the remains of MQ442 were no longer referred to as a mummy. The term had been stripped from the records. She was now classified as a thermal anomaly of unknown origin. But Sophia called her by the old name, Alteria Alsamita, the quiet flame. Sophia's instructions were simple. Observe, measure, never touch. But from the moment she stepped into the sublevel archive of the Black Vault in Geneva, she knew that something was watching. The chamber was silent. Her own breathing sounded sacrilegious. The wrappings, stored inside a nitrogen-filled containment, had begun to darken, as though charred from within. Not evenly, but deliberately, like fingers reaching out from the heart of something still smoldering. On the third night, Sophia made her first mistake. She brought music. She played an old lullaby from Upper Egypt, one her grandmother used to sing, a tune passed from mouth to mouth for generations, said to calm the restless dead. It was a simple melody, built on 5 notes, repeating like footsteps echoing in a tomb, and something shifted. The lights dimmed, the glass fogged, and beneath the linen, the shape of a woman's breast rose slowly, as if exhaling for the first time in thousands of years. Sophia did not run. She reached forward, not out of arrogance, but instinct. Her hand touched the containment shell, and it burned not from heat, but from memory. Visions flooded her, not dreams, not hallucinations, memories that were not hers. A throne of embers, a city of salt beneath a black sun. Women with tongues cut out, lining a corridor of fire, and at the center, a face, familiar yet ancient. Eyes that burned not with anger, but with remembrance. She collapsed. For 2 days, she did not speak. Doctors assumed exhaustion, but her colleagues noticed something else. Her body temperature would rise and fall in exact intervals. Every 66 hours, a 2.3 degrees Celsius spike. The same rhythm Merrick had recorded. The same pulse. On the 7th day she spoke again, not in her voice. In a dialect older than hieratic, phonetically similar to the language carved inside the Temple of the Serpent. Sunan, undeciphered ruin in southern Libya, believed to predate even the earliest dynasties. What she said, loosely translated, was this: "You burn what you do not understand. You silence what remembers. But I remember you all." By then, it was no longer a matter of myth. Something was happening, an awakening not of the body but of presence. Sophia had become a conduit. She no longer slept. She wrote feverishly, diagrams of burial chambers never excavated. Names of priestesses lost to time, and warnings always warnings. Do not unwrap the third shroud. Do not speak her name beneath moonless skies. Do not let the salt touch flame. But bureaucracy is deaf to mystery. On March 21st, the containment was moved. A new lab in Copenhagen demanded access. Sophia protested, but she was overruled. The linen shell was packed inside a triple-layer fireproof case, accompanied by 2 guards and a research technician. The journey lasted 6 hours. The transport truck never arrived. They found it the next morning, overturned on the side of a road near Hamburg. No tire marks, no sign of collision, just ash. The 2 guards were seated upright in the front seats, untouched. Eyes open, pupils burnt, as if they had stared directly into something brighter than the sun. The technician in the back was found curled into a fetal position, his skin pale, his hair singed. His fingertips fused together as if trying to hold on to something that had long since slipped away. The containment case was melted. The linen was gone. Sophia. She was waiting in her apartment, hands folded, eyes serene. "She is free now," she whispered. You unwrapped the third shroud. When pressed for answers, Sophia merely wept not from fear, but from longing. "You don't understand," she said. She was never a curse. She was a memory buried too deep. And now, she wants to be known. They placed Sophia under observation, but no institution could explain what happened to her body. Her internal temperature continued its rhythmic pulses, and her heartbeat slowed to one beat every 66 seconds. Her eyes darkened. Her blood thinned. On the 13th day, her skin began to dry and tighten around her bones. She was not dying. She was transforming. By the 21st day, Sophia no longer cast a shadow. Her skin, once vibrant, had withered to the color of sun-bleached parchment. Her lips cracked and peeled like aged scrolls. Yet her eyes, those hollow, deep-set eyes, glowed faintly, as if they no longer reflected light but emitted it. The doctors who monitored her vital signs had no answer. Her heart barely beat. Her lungs barely moved, yet she spoke, clearly, fluidly, and always in that same ancient dialect no one had heard in 4,000 years. Inside the ward, the walls began to blacken, not from smoke, not from mold, but from heat. Dry heat, silent heat, the kind of heat that turns prayer into ash. And then one night she vanished. No security footage, no forced entry. Only her hospital gown left folded at the center of the bed, and a thin, black scorch mark tracing the outline of her spine upon the mattress. Like a final breath exhaled in fire, what remained behind was a single artifact. It was not a relic, it's not a scroll, not a bone. It was a drawing burned into the floorboards beneath her bed. A woman, cloaked in flame, walking barefoot into a city of sleeping corpses. Her hands held no weapons, only fire. And every building she passed bore the same symbol, a single eye, shut tight, as though the city itself had chosen blindness. Below the figure, 3 words were scorched in Coptic script: "She will remember." In the weeks that followed, strange events multiplied. In Snow Paulo, a sealed tomb inside a Jesuit cathedral ignited without explanation. In Mongolia, a monastery buried by sand since the 12th century was uncovered, immediately burned to the ground. Though no weather patterns or human activity could explain the combustion. In Cairo, a professor of comparative religions began speaking in tongues, carving spiral symbols into the stone walls of his classroom with his fingernails until they bled. His final sentence before collapse: "She has found her name again." By then, few dared to speak of MQ442, because by then she was no longer an object. She was a presence, one that had outlived her own burial, one that had watched beneath centuries of linen and salt as humanity forgot what it once feared: not death, not the dark, but memory, the kind of memory that cannot be archived, contained, or carbon dated. The kind that smolders quietly beneath the skin of history till it finds a voice. Sofia Markovic was only the first. In early 2019, a second woman, Mina Hassan, textile restorer in Istanbul, collapsed beside a 7th century funerary shroud. Witnesses claim she had been singing, though no one could identify the language. Her hands were found blackened, her fingerprints scorched away, and beside her lay a torn piece of linen, marked with a phoenix woven in thread the color of dried blood. It was then that the final theory emerged, one that was never published, only whispered across encrypted lines and between the lips of those who knew too much. The quiet flame was not one woman. She was a lineage, a priesthood. Each generation one chosen to carry the ember, not to destroy, but to remember what must never be unearthed. When her body was wrapped in linen, it was not to preserve her, it was to bind her. But time has no loyalty. And in the arrogance of discovery, mankind had unwrapped the third shroud. The ember had found breath. To this day, museums around the world quietly rotate their inventories. Items go missing, sealed tombs are relabeled, linen artifacts are placed under armed surveillance. And deep beneath the Vatican, in a vault never acknowledged by the Church, There rests a single sarcophagus unmarked, silent and warm to the touch. No one opens it, no one speaks of it. But once every 66 hours, a low hum can be heard, not mechanical, not natural, like a voice beneath coals. Sophia's notebooks remain sealed in lead casing. The drawings, the diagrams, the phrases written in languages no one taught her. They are not considered historical. They're not considered real. And yet, in the center of her final page, written in her own hand, is a single line in English. No flourish, no mystery. Only truth. You call it combustion. We called it resurrection.